My name is Ahmed, and my life has always been deeply rooted in Islam. Growing up in a devout family, faith wasn't just part of our routine. It was the heartbeat of everything we did. 5 times a day, I knelt in prayer, reciting the Quran with reverence, believing that each word brought me closer to Allah. The mosque was my sanctuary, a place where I sought clarity and peace. I carried a sense of pride in my devotion, trusting that my unwavering dedication to Allah would guide me toward eternal salvation. My worldview was shaped entirely by the teachings of the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. I studied the hadiths, memorized key surahs, and immersed myself in Islamic scholarship to find answers to life's most profound questions. It gave my life structure and a sense of purpose, following what I believed to be the straight path laid out by Allah. Yet in the quiet of the night, when the world fell silent, questions would sometimes stir in my heart. I wondered about the nature of God, the weight of my deeds, and whether I had done enough to secure my place in paradise. The Quran spoke of a day of judgment when our actions would be weighed, but what if I fell short? These doubts never lingered for long. I pushed them aside with more prayers and study. Still, they lingered faintly in the background, like whispers I couldn't completely ignore. I had always respected other religions, even if I viewed them through the lens of Islam. Christianity, in particular, intrigued me. I found its teachings fascinating, but to me, it was flawed. The idea that Jesus could be the Son of God seemed impossible, blasphemous even. To me, Jesus was a prophet, a man chosen by Allah, but not divine. The concept of the Trinity baffled me, and salvation through grace felt like an easy escape from the accountability Islam emphasized. I often debated with Christians, confident in my ability to defend my faith. Armed with verses from the Quran and logical arguments, I prided myself on dismantling what I saw as contradictions in their beliefs. My faith felt unshakable, a fortress built on logic and devotion. But even then, in the quiet corners of my heart, those faint whispers of doubt remained. It was during a visit to family in another city that my life took an unexpected turn. The day began like any other. I prayed Fajr, recited my morning supplications, and spent time discussing theology with my younger brother. But by afternoon, I started feeling an odd discomfort in my chest. At first, I dismissed it as nothing serious, a passing ache that would go away. By evening, the discomfort had turned into sharp, stabbing pain. Breathing became difficult. "Ahmed, we're going to the hospital," my brother said firmly, already grabbing his car keys. I tried to wave him off. "It's nothing. Probably indigestion. I'll be fine." But I wasn't. By the time we reached the emergency room, I could barely stand. Doctors and nurses swarmed around me, their faces tense as they ran tests. Within an hour, I was lying on a hospital bed surrounded by machines. "You're having a heart attack," one doctor said, his tone urgent. A heart attack? At my age, I'd always been mindful of my health. I exercised, ate well and prayed faithfully. How could this happen to me? Fear like I'd never known surged through me. My mind raced with thoughts of my family, my prayers and the life I'd left unfinished. Was this it? Was I about to stand before Allah, unprepared and unsure? As my chest tightened and the pain grew unbearable, I whispered the Shahada over and over. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. It was my lifeline, my final anchor to the faith I had built my life upon. Then everything went dark. In that silence, I felt an indescribable stillness, as though time itself had paused. I wasn't afraid anymore, but I wasn't at peace either. I felt a presence, not threatening, but powerful and deeply familiar, waiting for me. And then the darkness shifted. Suddenly, I was no longer in my body. I looked down and saw myself lying on the hospital bed. Machines beeped erratically. Doctors moved frantically, and my brother stood nearby, his hands gripping a chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. I was floating, weightless, detached from the chaos below. But even as I watched, a sense of calm began to wash over me. I didn't know what was coming next, but something told me my life was about to change forever. I felt an eerie calm, as though I were watching a scene unfold in a movie. I tried to call out to my brother, to let him know I was still here, but no words came. In fact, I wasn't even sure I had a voice, or a body for that matter. The pain was gone, replaced by a strange detachment, as if I were tethered to another reality. I could see everything happening below, but had no way to interact. What's happening? I thought, my mind racing. Am I dead? A chill ran through me. My faith had always taught that after death, the soul is judged, its deeds weighed, and its destiny decided. But this wasn't what I had envisioned. There were no angels, no scales of justice, just me, floating above my own body, surrounded by an eerie stillness. And then I noticed it, a light. It wasn't like any light I'd ever seen before. It didn't blaze or blind. Instead, it radiated a soft yet piercing intensity. It pulsed gently, as though alive, growing brighter with every moment. The light wasn't coming from the hospital room. It seemed to exist beyond it, distant and yet impossibly near. The pull was instant, irresistible. It wasn't just something to be seen. It was a presence that reached into the core of whatever I had become. I hesitated, torn between holding on to the reality I knew and surrendering to this unexplainable draw. But the light called to me, not with words, but with a profound feeling, one that defied all logic or context. The hospital room began to fade, the machines beeping, the murmurs of the doctors, even the sight of my brother gripping his chair in silent anguish. Everything dissolved, leaving only the light. Suddenly I felt as though I were being drawn through a tunnel, the light growing closer and closer. At first I resisted, clinging to the remnants of familiarity, but the pull wasn't forceful or violent. It was gentle, yet completely unyielding. As I moved toward the light, a warmth enveloped me. It wasn't the warmth of the sun or a fire. It was something deeper, something that touched the very essence of my being. It was soothing, yet it carried a power so vast it left me in awe. The light wasn't just a sight, it was alive. What is this? I wondered, though the question felt insignificant in the presence of such profound beauty. Where am I going? A flicker of fear gripped me, a fear born of the unknown. My entire life I had followed the teachings of Islam, rooted my beliefs in the Quran, and trusted its promises. But nothing in those teachings prepared me for this. This wasn't the judgment or the paradise I had imagined. It was something entirely different. Yet beneath the fear was a pull I couldn't deny. The light wasn't just pulling me, it was welcoming me. It wasn't cold or detached. It was alive, warm, and deeply personal. And as I drew closer, the fear began to melt away, replaced by something else. Peace. This peace was unlike anything I had ever experienced, even in my most heartfelt prayers. It wasn't just the absence of worry. It was the presence of something pure and absolute, as though every doubt, every fear, every burden I'd ever carried had been lifted. But even in this peace, I couldn't shake the sense that I was standing at the edge of something monumental. The light wasn't just a place or a feeling, it was a threshold, and I was about to cross it. I hovered there, unsure, teetering between fear and trust. I felt unworthy, unprepared. What lay beyond? Was I ready for it? The light seemed to answer without words, reassuring me with its presence. Taking what felt like a deep breath, I let go and stepped into the light. The moment I entered, everything changed. The warmth I had felt before now wrapped around me completely, a love so profound it felt almost overwhelming. The light wasn't just around me anymore. It was within me, filling every part of my being. And then I saw him. At first, the figure was hard to make out, emerging from the brilliance of the light. But as he came closer, I was struck by an overwhelming sense of awe. His presence radiated power, yet it was tempered by a love and compassion so deep it brought me to the edge of tears. This wasn't just love as I had known it. It was love in its purest, most unfiltered form. It didn't just surround me, it penetrated me, reaching places in my soul I hadn't even known existed. Who are you? I managed to ask, though my words felt small and inadequate in the immensity of the moment. He looked at me, and in his gaze I felt as though every question, every doubt, every fear I had ever carried was laid bare and answered all at once. His gaze met mine, and it felt as though he could see right through me, into my heart, my soul, every hidden corner of my being. Yet there was no judgment in his eyes, only a profound understanding and a love so complete it felt overwhelming. "I am Jesus," he said. The name struck me like a lightning bolt. Jesus? My mind scrambled to process what I was hearing. As a Muslim, I had always revered Jesus as a great prophet, but only a prophet. The idea of him being the Son of God was something I had debated against, dismissed as a misunderstanding. And yet, here he was, standing before me, undeniably real and far more powerful than I'd ever imagined. "That's not possible," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "You're just a prophet. How can this be?" Jesus didn't argue. Instead, he smiled, a smile so kind and patient it felt like a balm to my confusion. "You have many questions, Ahmed," he said gently, "and I am here to help you find the answers." Before I could respond, the world around us began to shift. The light surrounding us seemed to bloom, and within it, vivid scenes began to form as if I were being transported to another time and place. The first scenes were familiar, stories from the Quran about Jesus. I saw him healing the sick, giving sight to the blind, and even raising the dead. These miracles, which I had accepted without question, now unfolded before me with a depth of compassion and authority I had never fully grasped. But then the images began to change. I saw moments I recognized, not from the Quran but from the Bible, stories I had dismissed before. I saw Jesus at the Last Supper, speaking to his disciples with a love that transcended words. I saw him in the garden, praying with such anguish it seemed to echo in my soul. And then I saw the crucifixion. I wanted to look away. I wanted to unsee the nails, the crown of thorns, the raw agony etched into his face. But something held me there. Even in his suffering there was a strength, a purpose, an unfathomable love that seemed to radiate from him. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling. "Why did you endure this?" "For you," he said simply, "and for all of humanity." Those words pierced me to my core. My understanding of salvation had always been tied to deeds, to earning favor through effort and devotion. The idea that someone would willingly bear the burden of humanity's sins out of pure love was almost impossible to grasp. The scenes shifted again. This time, I saw passages from both the Quran and the Bible laid out side by side. Jesus pointed to verses in the Quran I had read countless times but never truly understood. Prophecies about the Messiah, about salvation, about a light for all nations. Then, he showed me their fulfillment in the Bible, every thread weaving together in a way I had never imagined. "How could I not see this?" I whispered, my voice heavy with emotion. "How did I miss the truth?" "You were searching, Ahmed," Jesus said softly, "and now you have found it." Tears spilled down my face as his words sank in. Everything I thought I knew was being turned upside down. Yet amidst the upheaval, there was a strange clarity, as though a puzzle I had struggled with my entire life was finally coming together. "There is more to see," Jesus said, his eyes filled with compassion. "Will you come with me?" I nodded, though my mind was spinning. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I felt an unshakable trust in him. He extended his hand, and as I took it, the light enveloped us once more. The world shifted, and I felt a sudden weightlessness, as though we were being carried to a new realm. What I saw next was breathtaking. Colors more vivid than anything I had ever known surrounded me. The air was alive with a peace and joy so profound it felt almost tangible. There was no pain, no sorrow, only love, pure and unfiltered. In the distance, I saw people of every kind, their faces radiant with a joy that seemed to come from within. They moved freely, embracing one another with a completeness I had never witnessed. "This is heaven," Jesus said, his voice warm and steady. "This is what it means to be united with God." I could barely speak. The beauty of it all was overwhelming. "It's perfect," I finally whispered. This is what I've been praying for, isn't it?" Jesus nodded. "It is the fulfillment of God's promise, but it is not earned by deeds alone. It is a gift given freely through faith." The word struck me like a thunderbolt. My entire life had been built on the idea of balance, good deeds outweighing bad, prayers offered at the right times, fasting observed correctly. And now Jesus was telling me that salvation wasn't something to be earned. It was a gift. "Grace," I asked, my voice trembling with both wonder and confusion. "What do you mean?" Jesus looked at me with infinite gentleness. "Ahmed, no one can earn perfection. No one can live without sin, no matter how much they try. God's love is not something to be earned. No, it's something to be accepted," Jesus said, his voice soft but firm. "That's why I gave my life. For you, for everyone. So that through me, you could be free." His words shook the very foundation of everything I had believed. My life had been built on striving, on doing enough to be worthy in the eyes of God. But here, in this place of perfect peace, I was being told it wasn't about earning worthiness. It was about trusting in Him. Before I could fully grasp what he was saying, the scene around us shifted. The warmth and light faded away, replaced by a cold, oppressive darkness. It was as if a weight had suddenly settled on my chest. The air was thick, heavy, and in the distance I could hear faint cries, anguished, desperate, and hopeless. "This is hell," Jesus said, his tone sorrowful. "This is separation from God." I didn't want to see it, but the vision grew clearer. I saw figures moving in the shadows, their faces twisted in pain and regret. They reached out, desperate, as if searching for something or someone. But there was no answer. The despair was suffocating, cutting through me like a blade. "Why?" I whispered, barely able to speak. "Why do they suffer like this?" "They chose separation," Jesus replied, his voice heavy with sorrow. "God's love is offered to everyone, but not everyone accepts it. Hell is not a place of God's wrath. It's the absence of His presence. It's the natural result of rejecting the gift of salvation." I couldn't tear my eyes away. The suffering, the emptiness. It was worse than I could ever imagine. Yet even in the midst of that darkness, I could feel Jesus' love radiating through it all. His heart ached for every soul that had turned away. "Do you understand now, Ahmed?" he asked, his eyes locking with mine. "The choices you make in life matter, not because of what you can earn, but because of the relationship you choose with God." Tears filled my eyes as the truth of his words sank deep within me. I had spent my life striving, praying, fasting, doing everything I could to be good enough. But here, in the presence of Jesus, I realized all he wanted was my heart. "Ahmed," he said softly but firmly, "will you accept my gift? Will you trust me to lead you to the Father?" I hesitated, not because I doubted, but because of the weight of the moment. Everything I had ever known, everything I had lived for, was being questioned. But deep inside, I felt the truth. I knew it in every fiber of my being. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling, "I trust you." The light around us grew brighter, warmer, and a sense of peace washed over me. Peace unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't just peace. It was freedom. Freedom from fear, from striving, from the burden of trying to earn what could only be freely given. "There is more for you to do," Jesus said, his voice filled with purpose. "You must return and share what you've seen." "Return?" I asked, startled. "But I don't want to leave. I want to stay here with you." He smiled, a smile that was both comforting and challenging. "Your time here isn't finished. There are people who need to hear your story, Ahmed. They need to know the truth." The light around us began to shift again, and I felt a pull, as though something was drawing me back to the world I had left behind. I didn't want to go, but I knew I had to. Jesus had given me a purpose, and I couldn't ignore it. As the vision of heaven and hell faded, his final words echoed in my mind. "Go, Ahmed. Share the truth. I will be with you always." When I opened my eyes, the bright, divine light I had just left was replaced by the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. The pain in my chest returned, and the beep of machines filled the sterile air. I realized I was back in my body, back in the world I had thought I had left behind. Voices echoed around me, urgent and relieved. "He's back," one of the doctors exclaimed. I blinked, my vision blurry, trying to focus on the figures moving around me. My brother's face appeared, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and joy. "Ahmed, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice trembling. I nodded weakly, but the words escaped me. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the overwhelming experience I had just gone through with the reality I now found myself in. I had been in the presence of Jesus. I had seen heaven and hell. And now, I was here again, lying in a hospital bed surrounded by people who couldn't possibly understand what had just happened to me. The doctors spoke in hurried tones, marveling at how my condition had stabilized so suddenly. "It's a miracle," one of them said, shaking his head. "We thought we'd lost him." My brother gripped my hand tightly, tears streaming down his face. "Alhamdulillah," he whispered. "You're alive." Alive. The word felt strange, almost foreign. Just moments ago, or at least, it felt like moments, I had been standing in a realm beyond this world. I'd seen Jesus' face, I'd heard his voice, I had felt his love and accepted his call. And now I was here, in a body that felt foreign, in a world that suddenly seemed so small. Speak much. My family stayed close by my side, their relief clear in every glance, every gesture. But inside I was battling a whirlwind of emotions. What had just happened? How could I reconcile it with everything I had believed my entire life? Jesus wasn't just a prophet. That much was undeniable. He was so much more. But what did that mean for me, for my faith, for my family, and my community? The weight of it all was suffocating. Late that night, after the hospital had quieted down and my family had gone home to rest, I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of that encounter, the light, the love, the visions of heaven and hell, and Jesus' words. They were vivid, real, and impossible to ignore. Yet I couldn't shake the fear that gripped me. What would happen if I spoke about this? My family had always been devout, proud of their heritage and beliefs. How could I possibly tell them that everything we had believed might not be the full truth? I closed my eyes, hoping for sleep, but instead I saw his face again, kind, loving, and patient. His voice echoed in my mind. "Go, Ahmed. Share the truth. I will be with you always." The thought both comforted and terrified me. In the days that followed, as my body slowly recovered, my mind remained restless. I couldn't ignore what I had experienced, but I also couldn't bring myself to talk about it. Not yet. I needed answers, clarity, something to help me make sense of it all. One afternoon, when I found myself alone, I reached for my phone and started searching. I didn't know where to begin, but eventually I found myself reading about Jesus in ways I never had before. I read about his teachings, his miracles, his sacrifice, and I discovered grace, a concept that had seemed so foreign to me during the encounter but now felt like a lifeline. And then for the first time in my life I opened a Bible. It felt strange, almost forbidden, but as I began to read, I couldn't stop. The words leapt off the page, speaking directly to my soul. It was as though the book itself was alive. The more I read, the more the pieces began to fall into place. Passages from the Quran that had always puzzled me suddenly made sense, and despite what I was learning about Jesus, prophecies I had once overlooked or misunderstood now became clear. But with every revelation, the weight of my decision grew heavier. I couldn't keep this to myself forever. I had been called to share the truth, but the thought of doing so filled me with dread. How would my family react? My community? My entire identity had been built on being a devout Muslim. What would they think if I told them I had encountered Jesus and accepted him as the Son of God? One night, as I lay in bed, the burden became unbearable. I couldn't do this alone. I needed to talk to someone I trusted, someone who might understand. My brother's face came to mind. We had always been close, and while I knew he might struggle to believe me, I also knew he loved me enough to listen. With a deep breath, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. When he answered, I could hear the concern in his voice. "Ahmed, is everything okay?" "No," I admitted, my voice shaking. "I need to tell you something that happened while I was gone." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay," he said cautiously. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. The fear in my chest rose, but then I remembered Jesus' words, "I will be with you always." In that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. This was just the beginning. When I finally decided to share my story, it felt like stepping into a storm without knowing if I'd come out the other side unscathed. I started small, confiding in my closest friend, Hassan. He had always been my sounding board, the person I could trust with anything, no matter how difficult. If anyone would understand, or at least listen, it would be him. "Hassan," I began, hesitantly, as we sat together over tea. "I need to tell you something. But it's different. It's about what happened when I was in the hospital." He raised an eyebrow, concern flashing across his face. "You mean when we thought we'd lost you?" I nodded. "Yes. I didn't just lose consciousness, Hassan. I went somewhere. I saw something. Someone." His expression grew serious as he leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Taking a deep breath, I recounted everything. The out-of-body experience, the light, meeting Jesus, and the vivid visions of heaven and hell. I told him how Jesus spoke to me, explained grace and salvation, and invited me to follow him. When I finished, there was a long silence. Hassan stared at me, his face a mix of shock, disbelief, and something I couldn't quite place. "Ahmed," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "You've always been a man of faith, a man who seeks the truth. But it's hard to believe. Are you sure it wasn't just a dream? The mind can do strange things when the body's under stress." "I've thought about that," I admitted. "But this wasn't a dream, Hassan. It was more real than anything I've ever experienced. I felt his presence, I saw heaven, I saw hell, and I know what he told me is true." He looked away, struggling to process my words. "You're saying that everything we believed everything we've lived by. No, I said softly, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the truth is bigger than we ever imagined. Jesus isn't just a prophet. He's the Messiah. He's the way to God. Hassan shook his head, his disbelief clear. Ahmed, this could destroy you. If you share this, you know how people will react. I know, I replied, my voice steady. But I can't keep this to myself. I've been shown the truth, Hassan. How could I stay silent? He didn't say anything, but I could see the inner turmoil in his eyes. Part of him wanted to dismiss it, to chalk it up to a delusion or imagination. But another part of him, the part that truly knew me, was listening, questioning, maybe even considering what I was saying. In the following days, I shared my experience with a few trusted people, those who knew my heart. Some, like Hassan, responded with skepticism and concern. Others dismissed it outright, refusing to even entertain the idea that I could have truly encountered Jesus. But there were a few who listened with an open mind, asking questions, curious about what I had experienced. One of those was an older man from our community. He had always been a figure of wisdom and kindness to me. When I told him what had happened, he didn't interrupt or argue. He simply said, Ahmed, truth has a way of finding us, even when we're not looking for it. Perhaps this is God's way of opening a new path for you. Those words gave me strength. If even one person could see the sincerity in my heart, then maybe others would too. I knew I couldn't stop there. Jesus had told me to share the truth, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt that I needed to do so publicly, no matter the consequences. It wasn't about me, it was about him, about the message he had entrusted to me. So one evening, I stood in front of a small group of people, family, friends, and a few strangers who had gathered out of curiosity. My heart pounded as I began to speak, but I felt a presence, a peace, as if Jesus himself were standing beside me. I know many of you will find this hard to believe, I began, my voice trembling but resolute. But I have to share with you what happened. When I was at death's door, I encountered Jesus. He showed me the truth about God, heaven and hell, and grace, and he told me to share this with you. The room went still. I could feel the weight of my words heavy in the air. I saw a range of reactions: shock, confusion, curiosity, and even anger. But I kept going, recounting every detail of my experience, every revelation, every truth I had learned. When I finished, some people walked out, their faces hard with disbelief. Others stayed, looking thoughtful, as if they were wrestling with something deep inside. A few even approached me, eyes full of questions. "Do you really believe this?" one man asked, skepticism in his voice but not dismissiveness. "I don't just believe it," I said firmly. "I know it, and I hope you'll seek the truth for yourselves." As time went on, I worked to bridge the gap between my Islamic upbringing and my newfound faith in Jesus. I spoke about shared values: love, compassion, devotion to God. I showed how prophecies in the Quran pointed to Jesus and how his message fulfilled the promises of God. My goal wasn't to tear down anyone's beliefs, but to open their hearts to something greater. The more I shared, the more I saw lives being touched. Some people began exploring the Bible, while others began questioning their own rigid views. Through all of this, I felt Jesus guiding me, giving me the words to say and the strength to keep going. But I knew the journey was far from over. There was still more to be done, more people to reach, and more challenges to face. As I prepared to take the next step, I prayed for courage, knowing that my testimony could inspire others, but also bring rejection and loss. Yet deep in my heart I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't alone. Jesus was with me just as he had promised, and that truth was enough to carry me forward. As I embraced my new life with Jesus, I felt a peace I had never known before. For so long, my faith had been about striving, praying the right way, fasting the right way, doing enough to earn God's favor. But now I understood it wasn't about what I could do, it was about what Jesus had already done. Accepting him as my Savior wasn't an easy choice, but it was the most freeing one I had ever made. For the first time, I felt whole. The weight of my doubts and fears had lifted, replaced by a certainty that God's love wasn't something I had to earn. It was a gift. The journey ahead was both beautiful and difficult. I knew my testimony could inspire, but it also had the power to alienate. I began sharing my experience publicly, speaking to anyone who was willing to listen. I shared with them the moment I encountered Jesus, the visions of heaven and hell, and the life-changing message of grace that he had given me. At first, the reactions were all over the place. Some people were genuinely curious, asking thoughtful questions about my experience and how it fit with both the Quran and the Bible. Others were skeptical, even accusing me of being deceived or turning my back on my faith. The hardest reactions, though, came from the people I loved most, my family. When I told my parents about my experience, their shock was palpable. "Ahmed, how could you say something like this?" my father asked, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "We raised you to honor our faith, to follow Islam, and now you're telling me that everything we've believed isn't enough." "It's not about rejecting what we've believed," I said softly. "It's about seeing it fulfilled. Jesus isn't just a prophet, he's the way to God. He showed me that himself." My mother's eyes welled with tears, and I could feel the tug of war in her heart. She wanted to understand, but it was hard to reconcile my words with the faith she'd held so deeply her entire life. My siblings were just as divided, some dismissing my story, others quietly curious, but too afraid to speak up. Those moments were among the hardest I'd ever faced. The fear of losing my family was real, but so was the call to share the truth. I prayed constantly for them, praying for their hearts to be open to the message of Jesus. Even amidst the rejection, I found comfort and support from a new spiritual family. A local church embraced me with open arms, offering love and encouragement as I navigated this new journey. They didn't see me as someone who had switched faiths. They saw me as a brother in Christ, someone who had been embraced by grace. In those early days, I also began meeting others who had walked similar paths, former Muslims, Christians with Muslim backgrounds, and people from all walks of life who had encountered Jesus in life-changing ways. Their stories lifted me up, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this transformation. As I continued to share my testimony, I started to see lives change. People who had been indifferent to faith started asking deep questions. Those who had been firm in their beliefs began to consider the possibility that Jesus was more than just a prophet. And some, like me, took that brave leap of faith to accept him as their savior. One of the most powerful moments came when my younger brother, who had initially dismissed my story, came to me one night. "Ahmed," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you said about Jesus, about grace. I'm not sure I believe it yet, but I want to learn more." Tears welled up in my eyes as I embraced him. "That's all I ask," I said. "Seek the truth. Jesus will meet you there." As my journey continued, I found ways to use my unique background to build bridges between Islam and Christianity. I spoke about the shared values of love, devotion, and the pursuit of truth. I pointed out the prophecies and teachings in the Quran that hinted at Jesus as the Messiah, showing how the two faiths connected in ways many hadn't considered. But I also made it clear that the message of Jesus wasn't just about religion. It was about relationship, a personal connection with God made possible through his sacrifice. It was about grace, forgiveness, and love that exceeded anything I had ever known. Looking back, I see how God used every part of my life, my upbringing, my doubts, even my struggles, to prepare me for this mission. It hasn't been an easy road, but it's been more than worth it. Every rejection, every difficult conversation, every moment of uncertainty has been overshadowed by the joy of seeing lives transformed by the truth of Jesus. As I reflect on this part of my journey, I want to leave you with this. Seeking the truth takes courage. It means being willing to question everything you've known, stepping into the unknown, and trusting that God will guide you. But I promise you this: it's worth it. If my story has resonated with you, if you feel something stirring in your heart, I encourage you to seek Jesus. Open your heart to Him, and He will meet you where you are. Thank you for being part of my journey. If you'd like to share your thoughts or ask for prayer, feel free to leave your name in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, check out the videos on your screen now. Each one is a testament to the power of faith, grace, and God's never-ending love.